you're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ashraf. Good day, colleagues, participants, delegates. Welcome, everyone. As Ashraf has said, I'm Tanusha Singh, and I am the chair of the Occupational Health COVID-19 Outbreak Response Team at NIOH. It really gives me great pleasure to welcome you all to today's session. It has been a long time coming and well overdue. And this marks the first COVID-19 webinar on the informal economy, as all the previous sessions has been focused on the informal economy. So, it's really apt that we have this engagement today. We acknowledge the grave challenges faced by workers in the informal economy and the compounding impact that COVID-19 has had on this economy. So we really appreciate the effort that has been put into organizing today's session, and for everyone making the time. We understand how busy everyone is, particularly the membership-based organizations. So we extend our sincere appreciation to all the guest speakers, many of whom are no strangers to NIOH, the likes of Prof. Rajan Naidu, Dr. Laura Alfers, Ms. Vanessa Pillay, Ms. Eva Makuna, and many others. So to all the representatives from SALGA, COCTA, the Department of Employment and Labor, South African Informal Traders Alliance, the Johannesburg Informal Traders Platform, the African Reclaimers Organization, Asiya Etufuleni, a very warm welcome to all of you and to all the participants today. We really appreciate looking forward to today's discussions and deliberations and possible recommendations on a way forward for innovative approaches to addressing occupational health and safety within the informal economy. And may this be one of many more to come as we strive to do more for workers within the informal economy. We'd like to extend our sincere appreciation to WeGo for arranging viewing venues and also for making data available to members. Thank you so much, WeGo. And I would also just like to thank the entire NIOH team and the WeGo team involved in organizing today's session, and to the team of panelists who will be answering the questions during the session. Thank you so much. Without further ado, I'd hand over to Ashraf Ratcliffe again, the program director, who will take you through the proceedings for the day. Thank you all and stay safe.
Thank you, Tanusha. Tanusha is not just the head of the COVID-19 Occupational Outbreak Response Team, but she's also the head of the Immunology and Microbiology section here at the NIOH. So, yes, and thank you to the Women in Informal Employment, Globalization and Organizing, the full name of WeGo. So immediately I would like to hand over to Dr. Laura Alfers, who is, if my understanding is correct, the director of the Social Protection Program research, and as well associated with the Rhodes University. So Laura, over to you.
Thanks very much, Ashraf. I'm just sharing my screen. I hope everybody can see it.
Yes, if you could just maximize it, thanks.
Going to start. Thanks, okay. So I'm just going to give a quick framing sort of presentation, and I don't want to take up too much time. But I perhaps wanted to start by just thinking about who are the informal workers that we're talking about. This is a picture of Xolisile Mhlongo from Warwick Junction in Durban, and we're going to be hearing more about the work in Warwick Junction later in the presentations. Xoli is a bovine head cook. She cooks bovine head cows, which are enjoyed on the sides of the road. Several years ago, whilst setting up her cooking stove, Xoli's cooking stove exploded, gas stove, scarring her and injuring her very badly. And she spent three months in Addington Hospital recovering from this. During this time, she was unable to earn. She is the main provider for her household, with several young children. And in those 3 months, she was unable to earn. Chloe's a very enterprising person. She's rebuilt her business since then. But she talks about this incident as something that, you know, was life-changing and life-altering for her. And this is a story of many informal workers working in public spaces without protections, without labor protections, without health and safety, access to health and safety support in their workplaces. Why is it important to think about the informal economy? Well, I mean, there are many reasons, and we can talk about, you know, basics of human rights and workers' rights. But I think on a very fundamental economic level, the informal economy plays a huge role in South Africa in alleviating poverty. So data from Rogan and Sicelo from, I think it was 2017, looked at the relative contributions of different types of employment as well as social grants in keeping people out of poverty in South Africa. And they found that while 9% of the income from grants, keeping households above the poverty line, came from social grants, 14% of income keeping households above the poverty line came from informal employment. So actually we're seeing that informal employment does more than social grants to keep households above the poverty line. And as we can tell from Chloe's experience, when informal workers are not able to work, obviously the impact of informal employment in keeping people above the poverty line is seriously impacted. So supporting the income security of workers in the informal economy is central to poverty reduction. And I think in these times of COVID, we've heard so much about what is going to be done in terms of setbacks to poverty reduction in the world. We have Oxfam, you know, estimating that poverty reduction is going to be put back 20 years globally. And a lot of that is going to be in the informal economy, right? People who are just managing to hang on, who are losing that. And safety and health in the workplaces is incredibly important as well, emphasized by the way COVID is impacting us. Sorry, I'm just trying to move on. Just to give a bit of background about the situation of informal workers in South Africa. Generally, informal workers are excluded, and I'm talking about self-employed workers in the informal sector. Informal workers are excluded from the provisions of the Occupational Health and Safety Act. There is no employment relationship, so no onus can be placed on an employer to provide protection. And work in public space falls outside of the formal workplaces that are regulated by the Act. So there's two sort of key issues: the lack of an employment relationship and the fact that work is taking place outside of spaces that are formally designated as workplaces. However, South Africa has ratified a number of international treaties, conventions, which are listed here, which require member states to extend occupational health and safety protection to informal workers. So there is an onus on the state to provide these protections. In addition to this, we have ILO Recommendation 204 on the transition from the informal to the formal economy, which includes a clause on extending OHS protections to workers in the informal economy, in Clause 17. So there is a legal framework, an international legal framework, which does suggest that there is a responsibility on the state to correct the exclusions of informal workers from occupational health and safety provisions. Just quickly, and I mean, we're going to hear about this in more detail from the presentations that are coming after me, but I think there are just 4 quick things that I wanted to emphasize. We often hear that informal workers operate outside of the state, and in some respects this is true. Informal workers are operating outside of labor regulation. But they are included into other areas of the state. And one of the sort of areas of policy and regulation into which informal workers working in public space are included is into urban systems. However, the inclusion of these workers into these systems is often on adverse terms and often creates risks in itself. So one of the ways that we can support better occupational health and safety for workers in public space is by ensuring a more supportive and enabling urban environment. And this does actually require a greater conversation between occupational health and safety and and urban public health and safety. A lot of emphasis in the past, I think it's changing now, has been placed on the fact that because many informal workers are self-employed, self-regulation is the key. Okay, but it's very difficult for workers who are operating on the breadline with minimal resources, who are going to self-exploit in order to get the next, as much income as they can, to self-regulate occupational health and safety. That doesn't mean that workers shouldn't take any responsibility, but it does mean they have to be supported in promoting a safer and healthier work practices. We also need to account for the diversity of occupations and of risk in the informal economy. So you can look at a group of market traders or street vendors in Durban, and they're going to be doing multiple different types of occupations. Each of them is going to bring different risks. I think we also have to understand risk as gendered and as differing from place of work. Risk on a landfill site is going to be different from risk on a street corner. And so, in terms of extending protections that are meaningful, it may mean that we need to take account of this diversity in the informal economy. And I think lastly, but definitely not least, is that organizations of informal workers exist. We're going to be hearing from them today. And that working with these organizations of informal workers to identify priorities and design solutions is critical to developing solutions that are sustainable and speak to the real needs of informal workers. So I'm going to end now, but I just wanted to highlight that we go with several partners, including Asiya Tafuleni and Dr. Naidu from UKZN, have developed a set of guidelines. For these guidelines that you can see here are for street vendors and market traders and spaza shop owners around COVID-19 protocols. The idea is that informal workers can trade as safely as formal shops if these guidelines are in place and if they are supported to be able to adhere to these guidelines. And you can find more on these resources on the We Go COVID-19 page. There are also resources available for waste pickers in cooperatives. Finally, just to say that if you are interested in learning more about the complexities of extending OHS to informal workers, there is a special edition of a journal, New Solutions, that was edited in 2016 by my predecessor Francie Lund and Roger Naidu, which includes some very interesting articles looking at street vending, waste pickers, and really digging in more deeply into the issue of extending OHS to workers in public space. And if you'd like to know more about the legal provisions in South Africa and the possibilities for extending OHS law to street vendors in South Africa, I have included the link to an article by my colleague, Pamidzai Bamuchapunza. And I think I will leave it there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. That was Dr. Laura Alphas. Let me get that right. I hope I've got your title correct, Laura. The Director for the Social Protection Program at the Women in Informal Employment Globalization Organizing WeGo. So thank you very much for that. I am now going to just double check before we proceed with the program if our colleagues are online. That is the SAITA, the South African Informal Traders Alliance representative, and that's Rashida Muller. Is she online? If people could just check, as well as Eva Mokwena, and that's the representative from the African Reclaimers Organization, ARO, and then Clement Donka, I hope I've got this correct, Donkabe, from Tina Mashieli. Just to check that you're online as part of our panelist, that will be dealing with the item, the membership-based organizations, MBOs, experiences in occupational safety and health in the public workplaces. So just before we proceed with that, a bit of admin. So it's important to just advise everybody that at the bottom of your screen that you'll see the Q&A double speech bubble with Q&A there. If you double click that, it will pop out as a floating screen, and that's where we will ask people just to please pose their questions to our panelists and to our presenters. The chat box, which is a separate one, is for general comments. We will be issuing a certificate of attendance to all of those who just make available to us their email addresses, or we could get the attendance registers via the WeGo colleagues. And much thanks to our WeGo colleagues, and that's Ms. Vanessa Pillay, as well as Ms. Pat Horn, and the person who's just welcomed us on behalf of WeGo. So before I proceed, can we just check that we do have, Rashida, are you online? Okay, I don't hear Rashida. Eva Mokwena, let me just check. Are you online, Eva?
Sorry, Ashraf, this is Vanessa.
Yes. Hi, Vanessa.
I think the host just needs to unmute Rashida. She was not.
Oh, okay. And she is online. So I'm just going to ask our colleague Glenn in the IT department.
Hello.
I see
Hello.
Rashida now. Yes. So Rashida, welcome. And Clement, I just want to double check if Clement is there, and I'll ask Glenn and Vanessa just to liaise with each other in order to ensure that. So welcome, Rashida Miller from the South African Informal Traders Alliance. You are part of the panel dealing with the membership-based organization's experience on occupational safety and health in public workplaces. And we have approximately about 5 to 10 minutes for you. Please proceed.
Hi, good day, everybody. I'm greatly honored to be speaking at this on this platform. Yes, oh dear, can you hear me still? Yeah, okay, my laptop seemed to be performing. Anyway, from the CITA position, you know, when COVID-19 hit us in, I think around about, yeah, towards the end of March, this phenomena was totally unknown to us as the informal sector. We were, I would say, from shocked, not knowing what to do, not knowing where to turn, being told you cannot work, we are all in lockdown, was devastating to the informal sector. One needs to understand that an informal trader is someone that is out there in the open public spaces, earning a living day to day. So once that living is taken away, you know, there is such a huge impact that the informal traders really didn't know what to do. CITA immediately engaged national government and the Department of Small Business Development, but we were not even acknowledged. I hope I'm on still. Am I being heard? Okay, yeah. Sorry, this side, it seemed to be going funny. Anyway, so although we approached national and local government, it seemed that local governments went into hiding. And we could not even get them to talk to us. So we were left, you know, basically to plan amongst ourselves. What we've done, which has worked very well, is for the informal trader organizations to set up WhatsApp groups. So let's say, for example, on the Grand Parade is 100 traders. We'll place all of them on one WhatsApp group so that we, as a leadership of that movement, informal trading area, could then liaise en masse with their members. We find that, you know, during this period, we were not assisted by local government. 5 months later, for example, down in the city of Cape Town, 10,000 toolkits has been handed out, which is very, you know, we're very grateful for that, but they were not to be seen or heard late March, beginning of April. Nobody could find anybody. Everything was in lockdown, and the informal traders were really going into the poverty line. Many of them, having used up their savings at that stage, they could not continue trading. When we talk about the occupational safety and health on markets, one needs to realize that across the country, there's very little done by local government. And therefore, we as CITA is currently engaging SALGA across the country to talk about the management of open public spaces. And we need to strengthen our voices on these platforms. So yes, the pre-COVID, the COVID-19 period from April has been one that saw many atrocities. Even when certain traders were allowed out, harassment continued. Harassment continued by law enforcement, and we, although we tried our utmost to engage on national level, we were not given much opportunity or not much response from national as well as provincial and local government. I think now 5 months into the game, we are getting more response as they're coming out. But much needs to be done to create what Dr. Laura spoke about, the enabling environment and the implementation of the R204. The R204 is still in many municipalities across the country is a foreign word. And we need to, make more conversation on this matter so that the protection of the informal trader could be harnessed and they are really given, that protection by government. So in the urban towns especially, we find that, for example, there's no cleaning done on these markets. We have to organize ourselves to clean our areas of operation. Although maybe, in the big areas where maybe tourists would be seen, like in the CBD, you'll find local government would do something. But once it goes out into the little areas, like the little villages or suburbs, you'll find that government does not send out assistance, local government, to assist us in cleaning up and providing black bags for refuse, etc. So yes, it is important for our organization, CITA, the South African Informal Traders Alliance, to push the voice and the protection needs of the informal workers. And we are happy that this platform has been given to us so that we can raise the issues of concern. And I'm glad that SALGA and as well as COGTA is on this platform as well. We've written to COGTA as well, but we want to say thank you to WeGo and StreetNet. During this critical time of COVID, it was the WeGo guidelines that we as a leadership could then distribute throughout our membership to make them aware of the protocols that had to be followed. It's something new, and the informal trader was not educated on this. And when these guidelines came into place, we welcomed it, and we could then disseminate throughout the country. Yeah, I think I would rest for there now, and maybe if I need to answer some questions, I would do that. Thank you. Ashraf, you need to unmute.
Yes, apologies. My mouse wasn't cooperating. Thank you very much. That was Rashida Muller from the South African Informal Traders Alliance. I'm going to now ask Eva Mokoena from the African Reclaimers Organization to unmute and to use the 10 minutes just to make a brief contribution from your point of view, keeping in mind the interest group and the constituency you represent. Thank you. Eva, you there?
Hello, everyone.
Good day, Eva. Please proceed. Thanks.
I'm Eva Mukwena, chairperson of African Reclaimers Organization. When this COVID-19 started, I was in school at an EJ school in Durban. Yes, to tell the truth, my colleagues we were not all prepared for that, because like most of us didn't sell their material. We didn't have anything to survive with all throughout this COVID-19 up until some residents who had a good heart, who made some funding for us so that most of our reclaimers can have food on the table. Even me, I was also struggling because I was not prepared for that. The hope that I had is that by end of the month, yes, as usual, we will go and sell our material, then come buy food for the kids. But it turned out that was a mess. And some of us, of our co-workers, they even went to jail for that because they were starved inside their houses and they had to go out and find something to eat. Then they were caught, they were put in prison for that. And to tell the truth, yes, our government tried and industries to come and help us, but it's a pity because it goes in who's supposed to benefit, who's not supposed to benefit. While in this industry of our informality, when we go and sell to buyback centers, they don't check our IDs and our passports. The economy just grows. But when it comes to food parcels and people must eat, it go out who's coming from outside South Africa and who's not coming outside from South Africa. And that really hurt us as ARO because we believe in unity. In order for people to survive in this industry, you have to be united. In order for our government to recognize you, you have to be united. But instead, they were separating us according to where we're coming from. If you are not a South African, then you won't benefit from this. If you are, and that thing really hurt the organization so much because we felt that we were useless. We were not helping the people that we're supposed to be helping. Only helping those who are already have a privilege to get everything. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. That was Eva Mokoena from the African Reclaimers Organization, raising a number of other specific issues that faces them as reclaimers. And as Dr. Laura Alphas indicated in her introductory remarks, that the diverse set of risks that people face within the informal economy is broad. So we are now going to ask Clement, are you online? Yes, I see you. If you could just unmute your microphone. Thank you very much, Clement. And Clement is representing, is it Pina Mashiele?
Good morning, everyone. It's Clement Dongabe is representing the Pina National Public Transport Workers Organization.
Please proceed. Thank you.
Known as Pina Mshayeli, popularly known as Pina Mshayeli. So we are based at Tekwini at KZN. Our organization is working with taxi workers, taxi drivers, car washers, marshals. There is what we call sliding door operator. So during this time of COVID, COVID have hit hard to the workers in the taxi industry, and we have tried everything to the authorities representing the industry, and they failed us because when the Department of Labor announced that people who are working, they have to go to Department of Labor and access the UIF, those who are registered. But we have found that we are not registered to the UIF. So it was hard for us as taxi workers. And we have a call to our Santaco that is representing it's an employers organization and nationally, and they say they have nothing to do for us. It was very hard, and even now the work is not normally as usual, but we are still suffering. But the worst part, when we heard that we can have something to do with our municipality, Ethekwini municipality where we are situated, there is a department for us. We went to the mayor of Ethekwini, and they said we have to contact our office there, that is ETA. We're supposed to get help from ETA. ETA is the Ethekwini Transport Authority that is working with the transport. Is the transport department. When we talk to the Ethekwini Transport, to the ETA, they tell us straight that they cannot do anything with the taxi drivers organization. They only work with the EMTC, that is Santaco. EMTC is the regional organization for Santaco. They said it straight that they cannot, they don't have a mandate to do anything with us as an organization of the drivers, and it's hurt us a lot. I even put some proposal by email to the municipal manager there, not a manager, but for this department of ETA, I've sent the email telling them that what we want to do as the organization to the ranks concerning the social distancing, sanitization of the ranks, and also for the community. They tell us straight that they cannot do anything with us. Even now, in our ranks, where it is our workplace, there is no social distancing on the queue, because we have approached them in a way that we need to make marks in the ranks where of 1.5 social distancing. They say to us by the voice of Umlungisi Osiane, who is the deputy. I think he's the manager there by the Ethekwini municipality. They say they are preparing to procurement a tender for that what we are talking about. But since from there, nothing have happened. We never see anything happening in our workplace, like this thing of social distancing, deep cleaning of our rank and cars. Nothing happened at all. So we don't know what to do as taxi workers, because we have tried everything in our power to show that we are willing to work with government to assist as an NPO, because I know that the NPO is the extended arm of the government, but it's very surprising to see that the representatives of government, they say that they have nothing to do with us as an organization. And the situation in the ranks, that is our workplace, is dire, because there is some places where there is no even a toilet. There is some ranks that there is no toilet at the rank. Not talking about the water, since they are talking about washing hands now and then, but there is no water, there is no toilet. Even the community, when they are going to the rank, if they feel to go to the toilet, they don't have any place. So we are feeling a big pain as the taxi workers and the community of the taxi industry in our workplace, because we rejected by even our government. We understand on the side of work of the employers, because the employers, they're just looking for money. They don't care about the workers, they don't care about the community, they care about the money. But the government, municipal officials, I think is the one who have to take care, especially the ranks, because they belong to the municipality. The ranks are for the municipality. It's the one who have to take the responsibility of the safety, or of the health and safety of the workers, and also for the community, because it belongs to the municipality. So it's hard for us as workers. But
well, Clement, yes. Well, Clement, thank you very much for sharing that experience with us. So on our panel, we've now heard from informal traders and the huge surprise that COVID-19 as both a public health and an occupational health issue presented. The importance of the enabling environment that was emphasized also by Dr. Alphas earlier on. And then the reference to the ILO recommendation 204 clause 17. We've had the difficulties faced also by the reclaimers, and quite clearly in all three sectors, it's not just a question of income that is affected, but more importantly also how, as explained now just by Clement, how even on a public taxi rank, role players would need to impact on the containment measures that's there. We do have, therefore, the rest of our program where we have local government responsibilities being addressed next by representatives from SALGA and COPTA, as well as innovative approaches to addressing local needs. And we have a representative there from ASIA Tafeleni, as well as a representative from the UKZN Community Health Faculty, that's Professor Raja Naidu. I'm now going to just check, is Seketu Muvunza online? And I would like to just hand over to you from the South African Local Government Authority, SALGA.
Thank you, Ashraf. I'm online. I'm just not sure whether I'm audible from your side.
Yes, you definitely can be heard clearly. I'm not sure if you have any presentation to share with us.
Yes, I had shared the presentation yesterday. Let me see if I can share it from my side, or if Jeanette can share from her side.
Yes, I will arrange with my colleague Glenn just to share your presentation.
Okay. Thank you.
Glenn, if you could proceed. So just a reminder, a bit of admin, only questions in the Q&A double bubble speech box at the bottom. And those questions are being addressed by a group of panelists who are both NIOH as well as WIGO and other colleagues. including a colleague from the Department of Employment and Labor. And I want to say at this point to say thank you very much to Ms. Bulelwa Huna. She's a senior specialist in occupational health and hygiene at the Department of Employment and Labor, who's also part of our panel. So I'm going to hand over to you now, Seketo. Thank you. Please proceed.
Thanks, Ashraf. You can move to the first slide. Greetings, everyone. This first slide, I just want to share with you what SALGA is all about. We have been established in terms of Section 63 of the Constitution. We have a mandate to transform local government to enable it to fulfill its mandate. Amongst other areas which we have defined, our mandate is to lobby and represent and advocate for the interest of local government, to serve as an employer body of local government, to build the capacity of municipalities, to support and advise municipalities. So as and when Clement, Rosheda, and other colleagues were reflecting, we were attentively listening to can be able to see how we best support and advise our municipalities. We also have a responsibility to strategically profile the work of municipalities and to share knowledge and information with municipalities. So we represent 257 municipalities in the country. I think I have had some experiences in a municipality like eThekwini. Experiences will certainly be different in a number of municipalities. However, in saying that, we take note of what has been raised in relation to eThekwini. You can move to the next slide. As it relates to the session today, you will know that in terms of the powers and functions, when it comes to the three spheres of government in South Africa, we derive powers and functions from the Constitution. The funding itself also comes, it's derived from the Constitution, informed by the functions which are allocated to the different spheres of government. Just in brief, to indicate that the National Treasury currently, from the equitable share, which is generated from the tax base, which is generated nationally, national government receive about 47% of the equitable share funding. Provincial government receives about 43%, and national government, local government receives just over 9%. So that is in line with what is said to have been offered to these different spheres of government in terms of the roles and responsibilities. In terms of the objects of local government in relation to this session, we have got the responsibility to promote social and economic development. People like Clement, people like Tolile, what they are doing, it's more of trying to develop their social and economic status. And we have a responsibility as local government to create an enabling environment for that to happen. At the same time, while we're doing that, we also need to promote safe and healthy environment. That means that all those activities that are undertaken in the promotion of social and economic development should be done in a manner that does not also compromise safe and healthy environment. We also have got functional areas which has been allocated to us as local government by the Constitution. That includes, amongst others, the public places. That is where many informal economy happens. This includes the public road, the public parking spaces, sports grounds, and others. I'm highlighting this so that you can have this background when we look at the feasibility of occupational health and safety having to be provided in some of these areas. Because if you look at the park, for example, it becomes a multi-purpose space, and then the feasibility of municipalities having to ensure that the occupational health and safety of the workers and everyone else who uses that facility may be compromised given the different interest of different people who use this kind of facilities. Colleagues are correct that COVID-19 caught us off guard. As municipalities ourselves were also caught off guard. I understand that in other municipalities, there are concerns that municipalities were not there, local government was hiding and all that. But I think I need to remind everyone that as early as March, when the national state of disaster was declared, municipalities were given directives to perform only essential services. That's one. Two, to close public places, including public halls, including other places where our informal traders found themselves working. However, at the same time, the expenditures of municipalities had to increase because some of the directives like cleansing of taxi ranks, cleansing of public places and all that had to happen, while at the same time, there was no revenue during the period of lockdown because the community facilities, the stadiums and all that had closed. So I just want everyone to have this background as well. Then the issue of trading regulations, as it relates to our topic today, that is a mandate of municipalities insofar as ensuring that whoever is trading in a municipal space also conform to other laws and procedures as prescribed by municipalities. You can move to the next slide. You can move to the next slide. I think I'm still on the old slide. Okay, thank you. In terms of occupational health and safety, with the exception of mining environment and shipping environment, everybody in the country is guided by the Occupational Health and Safety Act number 85 of 1993 as the primary act which provides for health and safety in the workplace. The act further defines workplaces as premises or place where a person performs work in the course of employment. It also defines who is the employer and who is the employee. And in the context of our informal traders who contribute largely to the informal economy, they don't have employer-employee relationship with municipalities. What municipalities does in terms of ensuring occupational health and safety of the workspaces where they find themselves is to ensure that if it is a taxi facility, it has got all the necessary equipments, the necessary safety aspects for a taxi facility. However, given that in many instances, other open spaces or other areas which are not initially designed for trading purposes happen to be used as trading places. And in many instances, it's even not possible to ensure that you put occupational health and safety infrastructure, given that this kind of infrastructure is usually permanent. You cannot, in a park, for example, which is designed as a park, then design spaces to suit the occupational health and safety for the workers, not for the sports people or not for the people who are just visiting the parks for leisure. You can move to the next slide. The occupational health and safety then also outlines the general duties of the employers to the employees. Like I said initially, that municipalities do not have the employer-employee relationship with the informal traders. Again, it outlines the general duties of employers and self-employed persons to persons other than their employees. That's where municipality has got the relationship with everyone, not necessarily as a trader, but everyone who happens to be in the municipal spaces, whereas the municipality will be expected to conduct our undertakings in a manner that will ensure the health and safety of the people. However, the informal traders as self-employed people in terms of the act also have got an obligation to conduct their undertakings in such a manner as to ensure, as far as reasonable practical, that them and themselves and other people who may be directly infected by their activities are not thereby exposed to hazards to their health and safety. This simply means that there is an extension of responsibilities to informal traders insofar as ensuring that their health and safety, together with the health and safety of other people who are exposed to their activities, is taken care of. That is the situation which has been caused by the current existing legislation in terms of the occupational health and safety. You can move to the next slide. Again, ensuring the occupational health and safety of everyone, many municipalities has introduced informal trading bylaws to, amongst others, to provide for measures to ensure health and safety. Like I said, in terms of open spaces, it could be in the public roads where you have people trading right next to the roads. And then municipalities had to monitor, enforce, and then find themselves having to fight with the people who are trying to make ends meet by promoting their social and economic status. However, should municipalities not inform their trading bylaws in the interest of protecting the health and safety of the people, municipalities also could be found liable for not having to enforce the law. So we need to understand the balance in what municipalities is trying to do. You can go to the next slide. So these are just different forms of traders that we find in many municipal spaces. Unfortunately, they don't necessarily happen in the demarcated spaces. You'll understand that during the lockdown, municipalities later on were given a directive to issue permit to informal food traders and also to waste pickers. Anyone and everyone, including those who were not trading before, ran to municipalities requesting a permit from the municipality for them to trade. Unfortunately, many spaces had already been allocated to people who are in the database of the municipalities, to people who were already paying trading licenses to municipalities. And many people considered that as municipalities not cooperating, and yet it was not as practical as it was thought when the directive were issued to municipalities that everyone will go to municipality requesting permit, and municipality will of course have a limited space for everyone to trade. So that is the situation in which we found ourselves during this period. I wouldn't dispute the fact that some colleagues here were saying municipalities was nowhere or municipality was not assisting. Those were some of the situations which municipalities found themselves during the period. You can go to the last slide. Thank you, Ashraf. Thank you, colleagues.
Thank you very much for that. That was Mr. Seketo Mavunza from SALGA, providing the background and framework for the role of local authorities, that's the municipal authorities, in dealing with the needs of informal traders and the informal economy actors when COVID-19 presented serious difficulties, as well as the regulations that were applicable to assist people in the informal sector. We now have from COCTA, Ms. Yvonne Ofosu. Ms. Yvonne Ofosu is going to be sharing her slides with us. Just to check, Yvonne, yes, I can see you. Yes, and I can hear you. Please share your slides. Please proceed. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, thank you, Ashraf. My name is Yvonne Ofosu, as I've already been introduced. I'm the Deputy Director for urban regeneration in the department, in the business unit called Municipal Local Economic Development Support. Let me just put a caveat to say I'm by no means an expert in occupational health and safety, but I'm going to try my best to put the message across as I've been briefed. Okay, so, okay, why are my slides not moving? Can you see my slides?
Yes, we can see your slides. Please proceed.
Okay.
Unless you prefer my colleague to perhaps share the slides from our side and move it on your behalf.
I should think so, maybe, because looks like my slides are not moving here.
Okay, so let me ask Glenn just to do that on your behalf. You would need to stop sharing your screen, Yvonne.
Okay, will do.
Thank you very much. So just a reminder, an admin reminder, whilst Glenn is preparing those slides, we have the Q&A box at the bottom for questions, and we have the chat box for general comments. I see people have been mixing that up, as well as if we have the attendance registers and email addresses from those who are sharing the same venue, from the WeGo colleagues, we will secure your copies of an attendance certificate for those who are interested. Yvonne, your slides are shared. I'm handing over to you. You can just say next to Glenn if you need to move the
next.
slides.
Okay, so just a quick outline of my presentation. Look at the legislative policy context of occupational health and safety, the mandate of COCTA, and health and safety, whose responsibility it is, our role as COCTA in that, some observations, and obviously some conclusions. Next, please. Okay, so what I gather is that, I mean, occupational health and safety, it has a symbiotic relationship with work. I mean, the ability to work is dependent on good health and safety. And so they cannot be detached from each other. And as long as we have health and safety in the workplace, the productivity, you can click, I have some animations in there, so you can click any button for me. Yes, at least workers can achieve the optimal productivity that is required. And also, it's a matter of social protection and human dignity to ensure that workers in the informal sector are healthy and they have all the safety, they are exposed to all the safety requirements and needs that, that are needed in the sector. Can you, next slide, please? Okay. So here we look at the aspects of OHS in the workplace. So one of the things that I pick up is they need conducive premises to operate from. Okay, and it could be in the form of standards that municipalities prepare, appropriate signage, and so forth. So if we do not do that, we expose our informal workers to a lot of vices which are really unnecessary. The other aspect is the health and hygiene requirements that we need. Just as we do this for the formal sector, I think the fact that we have recognized the informal sector as one of the sectors or economic sectors in the country, we need to ensure that the same or similar procedures are actually provided for the sector as well. Okay, please, yeah. So one of the things would be your ablution facilities, your first aid, and even training, because we should not assume that they know these things. Just as we do fire drills and so forth as part of our safety requirements in our workplaces, these are things that we also need to provide for the informal sector. I believe that in spite of the nature of the space in which, okay, I'm hearing myself.
Apologies, I've just had to mute one of the other panelists whose microphone had gone on. Thank you. Please proceed, Yvonne.
So as safety requirements, we need to look at assembly points, fire equipment, all the things that we would have provided in the formal economy space. And what we say, what if there are open air markets? Yes, if you really have considered the informal sector or informal infrastructure as part of your planning in the municipality, irrespective of it being open space, I think that you are still able to provide some of these things. I mean, if you go to a public square or a public place, our, what do you call it, our parks, you find buildings that have ablution. In the same way, you can put a building there where you have somebody who deals with some of these things. You can have necessary equipment and so forth to assist with anybody trading in that particular space. But I think that the loophole here is the fact that we haven't really thought about how to plan our informal spaces, because we still see it as a new area that we're trying to navigate. But I think that it's high time that we consider some of these things, particularly planning for the informal economy. And all these things, I believe, will come into play. Next slide, please. Okay. So in terms of the legislative content, I think my colleague from SALGA has gone through in detail. But the one thing I would like to highlight here, I think I saw some comments saying that the Occupational Health and Safety Act does not exclude the informal sector. But when you look at it carefully, you notice that it really doesn't cater for them. Can you just click on my animation? I need to. Okay, so it's one of the red flags that I pick up. You can click again. There's a box that needs to appear. Okay, so it's almost absent, and we need to start lobbying for the amendment of the legislation and policy to ensure that the informal sector is actually catered for. Otherwise, what we're saying to them is that, yes, we know you are there, but you are not so important to us for us to cater for you in that regard. Next slide, please. Okay, so now you have the National Occupational Health and Safety Policy, which I had a look at, and it had these core principles. You can keep clicking, all the things will appear. And the one thing that stood out for me was where it says universal coverage. And that's where it actually acknowledges all employees, irrespective of the sectors. Okay, then it talks about the prioritization of prevention. So what are we doing in our policies to prevent the negative aspects of occupational health and safety, and even the culture, the promotion of the culture of prevention? That's where our trainings and so forth come in as well. You can keep clicking. Then there's a red flag there. But then as you go further into the policy, it says that one of the problems in the informal sector is the widespread use of non-standard employment and substandard subcontracting arrangements, and the growth of the informal sector have also been linked to increased OHS problems. Yes, it has, but what have we done to ensure that it is no longer a problem? The informal sector will grow as long as we have our economies declining and so forth. A lot of people will find themselves in the informal economy. And so if we do not start thinking about them as we ought to, we are always going to see it as a problem and not an opportunity for us to sort of start revising and revamping our policies and legislation around this particular economy. And then it talks about a major challenge, which is the servicing of SMMEs in the informal sector and protecting workers in marginal employment and vulnerable workers. I don't know what is marginal employment. Yes, I know women, youth, and children have been classified as vulnerable. Well, I don't know, but as much as we are vulnerable, I think we are also strong. And then it talks about marginal employment. It could be marginal, but it's important to the economy. And we need to start, as I said, looking at it from a different perspective. Next slide, please. Okay, so now I go into the mandate of COCTA. As a provincial government, it talks about we have to provide support and strengthen the capacity of municipalities to manage their own affairs and to exercise their powers and to perform their functions in accordance with the provisions of 154 and also section 139. We need to provide intervention in local government, intervention in municipalities, including the issue of directives and managing interventions. So these are some of the things, this is the mandate that we have as COCTA. Next slide. And through this mandate, within the department, we have these sections that deal with different things in municipalities. You have municipal finance that deals with anything financial, and they work in close relationship with Treasury to make sure that finances are managed in a manner that is right. We have also a municipal administration that deals with anything administrative in municipalities, including the provision of or the development of policies, bylaws, and so forth, the appointment of senior officials in municipalities to ensure that they are fair. We also have our municipal infrastructure that deals with basic services like our water, sanitation, electricity, through the MIC funding that is provided by national government. It monitors that and also make sure that these projects are undertaken through the expanded public works program. We also have our municipal LED supports, which is local economic development, and that it includes a whole range of things. We have our community service centers where we build what we used to call Tucson centers. I know they have different names in different provinces. There's also the project implementation and institutional support units that deals with any projects that we implement in municipalities towards local economic development. And that is where our support for the informal sector comes in. Municipal planning, dealing with all the issues related to our special development frameworks, ensuring that municipalities implement the Special Planning and Land Use Management Act and so forth. Then we have our disaster management centers that also deals with disasters in the province, but also to assist municipalities in dealing with disasters. So they have trainings, they've funded the buildings of municipal or district disaster management centers and equip them with all the necessary equipment and tools that are required. Okay, next slide, please. So now it comes to say whose responsibility, and I think it's come forth in some of the speakers that have come before me. So I want to clarify this to say that occupational health and safety in urban public, in the informal economy, is actually a direct responsibility of local government. Just as they prepare occupational health and safety policies for municipal workers and so forth, in the same manner, they need to ensure that the occupational health and safety in their spaces, irrespective of which economy it is, are dealt with. And this needs to be done through policy and bylaws, land use management, that's where your planning comes in. How many municipalities through their planning processes actually designate areas for informal traders and actually make sure that those areas are actually planned well so that they can operate efficiently. I mean, when it comes to the building of malls, municipalities get very excited because of the revenue base that they're going to get from there. But when it comes to the informal economy, it's a matter of, oh, let's designate this particular area here as a trading area with very little thought to what this economy actually needs to function properly. Then also there's enforcement. Often the efforts are concentrated on enforcement because somehow the informal economy is viewed as a nuisance, which really is not. If you actually have a database for them and they are required to get permits to trade, then you cannot see them as a nuisance. They are part of your revenue base, and therefore you should be able to provide accordingly for them. Then also there's the capacity building and training. that needs to go in, because a lot of the people who operate in this sector are probably illiterate or semi-illiterate. Even some people are illiterate in that economy. But then there are special trainings that one needs to give, because it's not the same as operating in the formal economy. So we need to have tailored trainings that one could give to ensure that these people are catered for. They know what is required of them, seeing that they trade or operate in spaces that are not necessarily formal in a sense. Next slide. Okay, so through COPTA, what do we do in terms of assisting with that? Obviously, our mandate is to provide policy direction to local governments through different instruments. We have the Back to Basics program that municipalities need to implement and also report on. There's the infrastructure support that we give through the MAKE. And one of the things that we assess or monitor them on is, are they even spending the money? You know, I know in the Northwest, if MAKE proposals are submitted for consideration, if there are no LED projects in there, they actually send it back to the municipality. And I'm hoping that even in this province, we are going to be able to take that step as well and ensure that the informal sector is well catered for. We also have a small towns rehabilitation program where a lot of our support to the informal sector has come through the provision of trade-in stalls, ablution facilities, the provision of or maintaining of public open spaces and so forth. Then we also have ad hoc interventions that come to us every now and then that we need to address with municipalities and other sector departments. Next slide. Okay, so how this oversight role applies to ensure municipalities provide and maintain adequate health and safety in. Okay, so municipalities, first of all, are required to develop and implement OHS policies, but we know that their OHS policies are limited to their workplaces. So maybe it's about time they start looking at OHS policies, even if it's not a standalone policy. They have informal economy policies or trading bylaws where these things need to manifest. We also have the guidance or interventions provided by the department to the respective business units in municipalities. Then we also develop indicators for monitoring and evaluation through the Back to Basics program as well. Next slide, please. Okay, so these are some of the things that we've done during this COVID period, and hopefully municipalities will still consider them even post-COVID. We issued a circular looking at the regulations of social distances for informal traders. And we said one of the things they need to do is to assess their current trading spaces and qualification for their trading capacity. Also the mapping of these spaces, because so we're trying to start moving them into the planning of informal economy, and probably look at even pop-up markets, because during this time, we know that most of our parks were closed. Why don't you convert these places to trading spaces so that you can actually be able to maintain the social distancing? And also, we have to take stock of infrastructure. We know that there are a lot of infrastructure that we have provided which are not being used. So maybe this is a time that municipalities can go forward and start allocating these spaces for the informal sector. Next slide. Okay, so then we have, we also issued a circular to say that the informal economy is one of the sectors that you are responsible for. So how come they are excluded in your formal interaction platforms? So we said that their LED forums, which they have, need to now be inclusive. I know some municipalities have informal economy chambers and so forth, but now you need to start looking at their role in these forums, because it's an IGR. If we talk about intergovernmental relations, why do we leave out the informal sector? When it comes to the agricultural sector, we are so quick to say, oh, this is an association, it's for small growers and they are key to the development of the economy. But when it comes to the informal sector, we forget that they are part, they have a voice in the development of the sector. Other types of support, we develop guidelines, toolkits to inform the informal economy policies. And this is actually done by the Department of Economic Development with SALGA, and we also input into that. We have an MOU with these two institutions, and we work closely because most of our mandates clash, and therefore we need to ensure that we are working together. Also technical support to the documents, government partnerships for the informal sector, and also non-governmental partnerships. COCTA has gone ahead to form partnerships with banks to provide training and so forth in municipalities. Next slide. Okay, so I just took the liberty to go through some of our municipal informal economy policies, or whatever name it has, trading bylaws in them. And I noticed that they all make mention of health and safety regulations. But I just started to wonder which health and safety regulations are they talking about? Because if they are talking about the national regulations, then obviously the informal sector is actually left out, because you cannot necessarily apply directly what is in the legislation to the informal sector. So I said that it's actually vague in terms of OHS, because it does not say which one it's referring to, whether it has developed one that is specific for that economy or not. And also, I've mentioned earlier, the planning for the informal economy is often an afterthought, and we need to start seeing it as a sector that we need to pay attention to. Next slide. Okay, so some of my concluding ideas, I said, we need to recognize and appreciate the uniqueness of the informal economy. I mean, I come from a country where almost 80% of the economy is informal, and we have put a lot of effort into developing that aspect of the economy. They do not operate formally, as we know. So what are the peculiarities in this economy that we need to know to ensure that the policies and bylaws and so forth that we prepare are actually relevant to that economy? Talk about the tailor-made OHS policies and bylaws, the identification of low-cost solutions and resources. Obviously, we all know that the revenue that is gotten from the informal economy, that is municipal revenue, it's very little, but it also does not preclude the municipality from looking at cost-effective solutions for this aspect of the economy. We need to take the training seriously, because if we do not train them, we can all assume that they know what to do. But if we all knew what to do, then we wouldn't even have the training and capacity building programs that we have in our formal institutions. So training is something that has to be ongoing to inform them of new trends, what the risks are in terms of the activities and how to prevent and so forth. Then one thing that we also need to do, which is critical, is to improve the statistical data of the informal economy. Many times when you start looking for statistics, the statistics are very vague and they're very generalized, and it doesn't give you a true picture. I believe that as we sit here today, no municipality will be able to tell you that I have so much informal traders or informal workers in my space. So we need to start seeing how best we can collect data on our workers in the informal economy, because that will enable us to plan better and provide better for the economy. And lastly, to say that as our previous General Secretary of the United Nations said that safety and health of workers is a part and parcel of human security. Safe work is not only sound economic policy, but it's also a basic human right. So in anything that we see that can improve the dignity and the rights of informal workers. We need to ensure that we do that, so that, because throughout the previous speakers, we've had a lot of complaints that are about municipalities not assisting. But if municipalities see taxi ranks in markets as their space, they will do anything that they need to do to ensure that these spaces are conducive for our workers. Thank you very much. Ashraf, over to you.
Well, thank you very much for that. And that was Yvonne Ofosu, who's also the, I think I just had my note here now. Thank you in detail at the end, Yvonne, with regard to your specific title. We are slightly over time, and I'm going to immediately ask Richard Dobson from Asiye Itafuleni to just please share his microphone, to open his microphone and to share any slides that he has. Richard, if I understand correctly, is I think he's the lead person at this particular organization. I've just misplaced my note. Please proceed, Richard.
Thank you, Ashraf. And would you please unmute Rajan so that he could also participate, because we're sharing a platform together.
Yes, Rajan would have to unmute from his side. Your microphone was slightly glitching. If you need us to share your slides from our side, please just let us know. We'll monitor the quality of your sound. Please proceed.
Thank you. And I just want to start my video. Right, here we go. So thank you, Chairperson, and greetings to the delegates. Wonderful opportunity, and the discussion so far has been really great. This is a shared presentation, really, I guess, in some respects, getting down to a much more practical level. And this is talking about a long-standing relationship that our NGO in Durban has had with Rajan's organization, and starting to talk about some practical outworkings about how one can interact. I'm conscious of time, so if we rush through the slides, please, everybody bear with us. And for some reason, they're not operating, so could you help me, please, Ashraf? Could I have the next slide?
Okay, I'm going to ask Glenn just to, you may need to unshare yours on your side so that Glenn can then use the share facility to project from the side. If you could just indicate to him next when he needs to move slides for you.
I think I've unshared it.
Thank you, yes. So Glenn, please proceed in sharing the presentation on behalf of the presenters. So Richard, is that correct? The one that you've seen there? That might have a different starting slide.
I'm not seeing anything at the moment. Can everyone else see something?
Okay, it's going to come back in a moment.
Right, that is the first slide. Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
And if we could go to the first slide. Thank you very much. So first slide, first one, COVID-19, thank you. So we're stating the obvious, but regretfully and sadly, COVID-19 is actually really providing a new paradigm for responding, both from a health perspective, but we believe particularly from an urban reconfiguration perspective as regards to informality. Next, please. And historically, informality, as we know, has been marginalized. We've been hearing just all sorts of responses from workers themselves, but it's been marginalized as a livelihood practice, and it's also been marginalized as deserving of workplace health and safety. Next, please. And so COVID-19 brings a number of realities. First, health and safety dictates. And those are really now, if there have been nice to haves, as we've been hearing through very powerful presentations, particularly the last one, now it's even more significant that we really need to be taking on board health and safety, particularly with respect to the pandemic. But one of the key pillars of that health and safety response is going to be about physical distancing. And so as we take that on board, as we'll see just now, that has huge implications in terms of urban transformation. We've also heard that it's had catastrophic impact, and particularly in terms of loss of livelihoods. We've heard about local examples, but if one wants to start thinking about it globally, it's estimated that over 2 billion, B for billion, workers earn their livelihoods informally, and literally overnight, 1.6 billion workers lost their livelihoods. Most of us listening to this presentation have enjoyed some form of safety net during our lockdowns, but for many, literally they went home and the next morning they had nothing. And then the most significant thing is that there's potential for the transmission of hazards across formal and informal sectors, but critically the intersect of all those are often through informal hubs. So whereas people have been dismissive and disregarding of informal hubs, those now start to become critical in terms of the network that you have to manage in terms of transmission during this period. Next, please. So what are the consequences? The consequences are that there's now no longer any justification for having different protocols in terms of health and safety between workers per se. And that's to remove the distinction entirely as to whether we're talking about so-called informal or so-called formal. So we think that this is an amazing opportunity to start huge levels of reformation in terms of how we've drawn these distinctions in the past. The second is that if we are going to start to achieve physical distancing, which is mentioned earlier as one of the key pillars of the health strategy in terms of the environment we're in now, it implies that we've got to completely reconfigure the public spaces that are being utilized by informal workers. And research that we are conducting together with other colleagues shows that this is possibly one of the biggest tensions, that informal workers are already overcrowded in spaces that they've been confined into by local government. And so to achieve the right disciplines in terms of physical distancing, that's impossible. And the moment workers try and expand into sensible levels of distancing as they're required to do, the strong arm of the law comes down and there's punitive enforcement. So we think that this is now going to be really significant in terms of how our cities are reconfigured, cities and towns. And lastly, our memories are short about the impact of COVID, particularly during the lockdowns. Everyone was aware of the absolute dire consequences of people really starving and struggling. And so if, and this is particularly politically, local governments are going to undertake and respond to their development mandate, which is that they are going to have to be the developmental arm of government, then it's going to have to become a priority. So the things that's been shared earlier are now going to be absolutely foregrounded. Next, please. So what is the opportunity? Locally, I mentioned we've been in partnership with Rajan's unit. And so this now has really turned out to be an opportunity to invigorate what has been a long-standing relationship between us, but particularly now to be able to practice synergy and to get projects on the ground. Rajan, over to you for the next slides.
Thanks very much,
Next,
Richard.
please.
I trust that I'm audible to everybody. Good afternoon to everybody, and thanks for the opportunity to interact with you. I think this has been an extremely useful input up to now, and apologies for some of the overlap in the from previous presentations. But as Richard has indicated, I think we have important opportunities to consider here. But I think as well as Yvonne's presentation so clearly outlined, we have critical challenges to address. We have a massive historical challenges in the informal sector that needs to be addressed. And she has, I hope, placed this squarely in the location of government to address these things immediately. But I think also we need to bear in mind that the challenges faced in the informal sector are not just those of government alone, but it has to be that of the formal sector. As Richard has indicated, the epidemic brings to the fore the cross-cutting nature of the risk. It is not just informal workers working in their isolated areas, but informal workers coming into direct contact with formal workers who take the infection back into their formal working environments, and therefore leading to the transmission of disease in these formal workplaces. But just to start, what is the relationship between work and health? Occupational health, never before, ever since I've been involved in the last 20 to 30 years in occupational health, as occupational health becomes such a common term that we hear about every day. But what is it? Basically, our challenge as occupational health practitioners is to understand the relationship between work and health. There's some of us who would think, I know there are a lot of occupational health experts in the meeting today, and welcome to all of you. But for those of us that are encountering these concepts now in the last few months, what is it? Essentially, it's the way the work that we do interacts with our health. So it has an impact in two ways, not just by the work that we do causing us to become sick, as we would see that in the case of the epidemic, but it is also our health that we bring to work. For example, if we have chronic illnesses, whether we're diabetic, hypertensive, or we have any other disability, it impacts on our ability to work. Now, this bidirectional nature of work and health is so critical. In the formal economy, we know that irrespective of whether you have the work causing your ill health or whether you have ill health impacting on your ability to work, there exists safety blankets to support the formal workers. You have things like paid sick leave, you have medical boarding if you cannot be medically managed, and then if you have a work-related problem, you have compensation. May not be adequate, there's lots of shortcomings in our compensation system, but these exist. Now, these don't exist in the formal sector, in the informal sector. If workers need to take time off work, it directly impacts on their income. So how do we address these? These things cannot be addressed just by us talking. There has to be formal networks and formal policies put into place. Similarly, there are structural protective frameworks within the formal economy. You have the health and safety legislation, and I've been following some of the discussions on the chats. Yes, some of this legislation does extend to the informal sector, but the challenges are how applicable is it? You could say, yes, a working environment is a working environment even in the informal sector, but can you really impose in an informal sector the health and safety, Occupational Health and Safety Act, the regulations that go with it? Not practical. So how do we go about addressing this? In the formal sector, you have employer-funded occupational health services. You also have employer-funded specialist services. So if a major company wants to get a specialist, occupational medicine specialist, they have the resources to acquire this. Not so in the informal sector. Next slide, please. So all of these come to the fore with the epidemic. And what we're wanting to do, as different from the presentations right now, as Richard indicated, is how do we make this much more practical? How do we seize the opportunity presented by the epidemic, recognizing that the epidemic extends beyond just the workers in the informal sector and starts to impact. And if we don't address what's going on in the informal sector with regard to the epidemic, then it opens up a whole new nidus of infection for the rest of the economy. So the key tasks from a health point of view is how do we reduce the risk of workers acquiring infection? How do we reduce the risk of workers developing serious outcomes? And how do we make sure that we return the worker to work following a proper assessment? What do we need to do? We need to have proper workplace planning, the same that takes place in the formal economy. You have to have these standards in some shape or form in the informal economy. We need to make sure that we have standard infection control guidelines, but these have to be modified, these have to be meaningful, and they have to be appropriate to the particular workplace that we're talking about in the informal sector. We need to have workers assessed clinically, and we need to make sure that workers are returning to work after severe illness, that they're appropriately assessed for this. And of course, we need to have screening and testing of workers, because if we don't, then that's the first line of prevention and of spread that we have, and this has to be implemented. Next slide, please. So together with colleagues from the other professional bodies, that's the occupational medicine specialists, the occupational health nurses, and occupational hygienists, we've proposed a pilot, which to some extent we've already started implementing as far as is possible with our limited resources, to provide a set of tools which allow for workplace and worker assessments in the informal sector. We're wanting to establish a network that is able to provide the necessary expertise for the informal sector, and if necessary, have these experts go out into these different working environments and provide the assessment that takes place there. We've, as Richard has mentioned, we have managed to do this on looking at a very specific grouping of informal workers, and it's this that we need to now roll out on a larger scale. And then when you have outbreaks within these public spaces, among the informal workers, how do you manage this? Who takes responsibility? To what extent does government take responsibility, and to what extent do you need to bring in the experts to assist? We've already identified a panel of specialists, and they have committed some of their time voluntarily to this project, but we now need to find additional resources. We have approached both the Solidarity Fund and the Compensation Fund for providing support, because we believe that it is these pools of public resources, the Compensation Fund as well as the Solidarity Fund, that must now reach out to the broader sector of the informal economy to protect the health of the workers in the informal sector. The panel will develop a whole range of tasks and protocols based on the assessments that they conduct in these different environments. So this is the sort of pilot that we're wanting to implement, and we hope that we have the resources available to do that. But as we're saying, this becomes a pilot for how we address occupational health and workplace health in the informal sector. It's meant to be, not meant to be COVID-19 exclusive, but how do we work in the new era of informal work? Richard, over to you.
Thank you, Rajan. To end with a couple of practical examples. The first is I just want to expand on what Rajan shared about the specialist services. So I think all of us have been exposed to general health guidelines, which are applicable across the whole, which would be applicable or recommended across the whole sector, groups of sectors of work. But we believe that the next layer that really needs to be implemented is what we're calling sector-specific protocols. And the one example that we've already piloted, sadly out of necessity, because here in eThekwini, the city has been acting really punitively towards informal traders who are selling second-hand clothes. under the suspicion that the clothes are the imported source of the virus. But we know that the reason for this is all complex, and with suspicions as well that it's just been seized as an opportunity to remove that activity from the streets. But what Rajan's team was able to do, together with our NGO and the workers themselves, was to inspect the various locations where these clothes have been sold, and have been able to offer constructive guidelines, first of all, about how that activity should be managed in a way that would be safe, but also to provide reassurance that, in fact, the clothes themselves and retention of any virus on those clothes is ill-founded. So we believe that those sort of protocols would be applicable to across all the activities, from traditional medicine to cow's head cooking to mealie selling to all the different activities, just as those protocols are available in the formal sector between retail, fast food outlets, etc. The next two that we want to share is the example of what we are responding to in terms of health and hygiene, in terms of washing hands. Time doesn't permit us to really talk about the bigger philosophy behind this, but we are not believers or the advocates of the long-term sustainability of commercial chemical sanitizers, and we believe that hand washing is the solution. And so we have developed a number of responses that start to repurpose available materials to form what we're calling the wash stations. They're going to be based on what we call the street corner response. And next slide, please. And then the tabletop response. And it is at the tabletop response that we believe is probably going to be the most powerful outreach, because it's the exchange between vendor, trader, and the customer where there's probably the biggest point of vulnerability. And it is also in terms of influencing this form of transformatory practice that you can start to take that into the residential environment as well. In other words, individual homes could have one of these units quite literally at the front door, and we can actually start to convert long-term sustained practice in terms of wash principles. The next point, please. Next slide. And lastly, two other components that have been developed, this question of physical distancing. So a whole range of tools developed together with Rajan's team about physical distancing and how you can start to disseminate that onto the street. So these are going to be large-scale street posters which are going to be put out onto the street with key coding for people to self-manage some of those kind of physical distancing guidelines, and then to raise up what we're calling health champions. We're still working on whether that's an appropriate name, but we definitely think it's a soft term rather than something like a health marshal, which starts to conjure up the idea of the lockdown treatment that many workers were getting from the police and army. And part of the way that we'll do that is through bibs with messaging. And Rajan's team has made themselves available to start working with us to develop a training module that would allow us to train those health champions. Those health champions, we are imagining, will be the custodians of the wash stations. Last slide, please. So to thank you all, and those are our contact details, and I've seen in text in the chat box, people are requesting copies of this presentation, and I leave that to the organizers. Thank you, Chairperson.
Well, thank you very much. That was Richard Dobson on behalf of, and I've got that right, project leader at ASIE Itafuleni, as well as Professor Rajan Naidu, the head of the clinical department, the discipline of occupational and environmental health at the, I think it's the School of Nursing and Public Health at UKZN, who is also a member, I think, of the National Department of Health-led COVID-19 outbreak response team. Thank you very much to both Richard and Rajan for that. We now have approximately about 10 minutes or so for us to engage in some questions. And one of the key questions that have emerged, and perhaps I'm going to ask Pat to unmute her microphone. She has been keen in the Q&A section to address some of the questions that have been asked there. So Pat, if you could just unmute your microphone, and I'm just quickly going to, I see, yes, you are there. Hi Pat, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, there's some questions you wanted to address live, and I'm going to give you a quick opportunity to deal with one or two of them. I don't know if you want to start with the one that deals with Occupational Health and Safety Act. Livingston has indicated, and let me just see if I can do this sharing of this particular slide. One moment. Okay, so I'm not sure if everybody can see that. So I think Livingston Moyo wanted to, I think I need to just do under that formatting, and hopefully that will be a bit bigger. How much progress we made in designing of the Occupational Safety Act, which includes informal traders. Bulelwa has given a response there, but Pat, you wanted to speak to that. And we just heard Prof. Naidu, Rajan, indicating that the applicability of, or the application, I guess, of Occupational Safety Act and probably COVID-19 regulations as well is where the problem is. Any comments from you there, Pat?
Yes, one thing which has been missing so far that I want to mention is that there is a national task team on implementation of ILO recommendation 204, which is on transitions from the informal to the formal economy. And that national task team has a legal reform subcommittee whose task is to actually look through all the legislation, not just the health and legislation, but including the health and safety legislation that needs to be reformed in order to be more fully applicable to workers in the informal economy. Because one of the reasons why people are informal is because they don't get properly covered. So I've actually taken note of Livingston's question and also his email address, and I'm going to send him the terms of reference for that legal reform subcommittee to show basically what's on track. So, you know, just to move on then, you know, some people have mentioned whether shouldn't there be an MOU between informal workers and the Department of Labour. Unfortunately, it's not as simple as an MOU issue. There's a lot of things that need to be done, and that's the reason why there's a national task team. The national task team is coordinated by the Department of Employment and Labour, but both COGTA and SALGA sit on that task team because they are the ones who are responsible for the coordination at municipal level, and a lot of informal work is coordinated at municipal level. The question that somebody asked about the taxi sector, actually there's two levels of responsibility for the taxi sector, because there is a sectoral determination which determine the conditions of the drivers and the other workers like the rank marshals and the conductors and the washers. But there's a high level of non-compliance on the side of the employers in the taxi sector, which is why, as Clement mentioned, when COVID-19 came, they all found they were not covered by UIF, and they were supposed to be. But the municipalities also, because they manage the space and they own the space that the taxis park in, they have responsibility for the public space management, where taxi workers are as affected as informal traders and waste pickers and so on. Somebody asked a question about food relief distribution. There was a lot of that in the beginning. It wasn't very satisfactory. There was a lot of corruption. It was very difficult to get to everybody who needed it. So most workers in the informal economy preferred to get back to work as soon as possible. And that's been happening gradually. Even though once they're back at work, their earnings are not what they used to be before, because the economy has changed for most of them. But it's a whole lot preferable than waiting for food relief, which either doesn't come at all or gets eaten by somebody else. So the other last point I want to make is people have mentioned the importance of partnerships with the MBOs, the membership-based organizations. That's very, very critical. And we have been having a subcommittee of the NEDLAC Rapid Response Task Team on public space management. And the partnerships with the membership-based organizations of workers in different sectors of the informal economy, some of whom you've heard here this morning, are extremely important because the municipalities can't make these things work unless they work closely with the people on the ground. There's too much slippage in between the supply and the demand for these things. A lot of people have mentioned the need for informal economy workers to be to be sensitized in terms of safety. I just want to say to those people, the sensitization is not lacking on the side of the informal workers. It's more lacking on the side of authorities, government officials, health and safety officials, etc. There's a lot of training needed at that level. With the workers, they can be as aware as they like of their safety, but if nobody is paying attention, they have no choice but to go to work in unsafe conditions. So let me leave it there so others can also respond to some of the other questions.
Thank you, Pat. We do have also a question, and I think it was, if I can just quickly get my box up again, for Salga. And what is Salga doing for municipalities to assist them with implementation of programs in health and safety? As I have not seen anything done by them in health and safety and supporting safety officials. Maybe if we could just quickly get a response there from Seketo and Yvonne briefly. We have about, say, 2 minutes just for this particular question.
Thanks, Ashraf. At a national level, we currently do not have a national program aimed at that. However, some Salga provincial offices like KwaZulu-Natal, Free State, and Northern Cape have currently initiated programs aimed at empowering both councillors and officials on occupational health and safety. I'm talking of accredited programs which are currently under implementation. It's only at a national level where we haven't managed to have a national rollout. It's something we are considering based on the experiences of other provinces. Thanks, Ashraf.
Seketo, just maybe a quick follow-up question with you whilst I have you. The question was raised by Clement and I think somebody in our Q&A section about the basic ablution facilities. And I think Yvonne might have touched on this as well. Be it taxi ranks or any of these sort of markets that are regulated or overseen by municipalities, apart from the conducive premises and safety requirements that Yvonne raised in her presentation, are municipalities providing basic, ablution facilities for hygiene and health, given that COVID-19 as well as other health and safety hazards, those facilities are important?
Ashraf, taxi facilities are responsibilities of municipalities. Municipalities are supposed to be providing basic, facilities like ablution, water, cleansing, and all that in all taxi facilities. Like I indicated that we have got 257 municipalities. We may have heard of the experience of eThekwini in this platform, but I can assure you that in particular during COVID, you may have seen a number of video clips, a number of pictures where municipalities were even using the fire vehicles to cleanse public spaces, including taxi ranks. So it could be true that there are still other municipalities which are lacking in that, on that aspect, something which we have taken note of. However, in brief, that is the responsibility of municipalities. Municipalities should be doing that in essence. Thanks, Ashraf.
Thank you for that. And maybe just to quickly bring in Yvonne. Yvonne, there's a comment made by Francie Lund. And Francie is saying, I want to comment on the importance of the local level of government and but how it itself is wrongly structured for the changed world of work, and I would assume this is a specific reference to the informal economy, and it makes a reference to other countries and local municipalities, not just those in South Africa. Francie is proposing or suggesting that the NIOH has to take this on board as an issue and goes beyond the words, quote, become inclusive of informal economy, which is nevertheless a good start. So this, the importance, if I could put it to you, Yvonne, of the local government, of municipal authorities in the arena of the informal economy. We've heard a reference made earlier by Dr. Laura Alters of the enabling environment that Rashida has also sort of underscored. What is the role of the local authorities in contributing to such an enabling environment in the light of Francie's comment?
Okay, thanks, Ashraf. Remember that municipalities, one of the key responsibilities of municipalities is to create an enabling environment for the economy to thrive. Okay, so one of these economies is the informal sector. Okay, and as I said earlier, very little is being done in that sector, either because this sector has not really been embraced by municipalities. You know, yes, they know it's there. Oh, this is what we can do. They don't need much. But in actual fact, there's more to the informal sector than we think there is. Okay. And I believe that there's been study tours to different countries to see how the informal sector works. As I said earlier, I come from Ghana, and almost 80% of our economy is informal. Okay, and with that, there is planning that goes, it may not be to the scale of planning in South Africa, but markets are planned. There's a current project in Kumasi, if you've heard of the Ashanti Kingdom in Kumasi, where the king actually donated land and lobbied for funding for the building of a market. There's a market that has been getting fire outbreaks almost twice every year. And they've lobbied for funding to actually build a new market. And as I watched the video, there's going to be a fire station, there's going to be clinics, there are going to be creches, because it's also attached to a main transportation hub. So even in thinking about our informal economy, it goes beyond just trading stalls and demarcating spaces on pavements for them to trade. We need to start really thinking of them as part of the planning process and the development process. Just as we budget for basic infrastructure, we also need to see that they also need infrastructure that that are conducive for them to thrive. And that's part of the enabling environment that municipalities need to sort of understand. So I think it's about defining what the enabling environment is and knowing what goes into it sector by sector. You know, if we don't start doing that, we're going to always get it wrong and just scratch the surface.
Thank you very much. I do have 2 minutes left, and I want to just quickly give Richard and Rajan an opportunity to make a final sort of concluding remark, and then to end off with Dr. Laura Alters. So just over to you, Richard and or Rajan.
I'll leave it to Richard to take the lead.
Thank you, Rajan. Richard, please.
Thank you, Chairperson. I don't have any particular remark except to say that I found this discussion hugely exciting, and particularly what I'm hearing from Yvonne. This is about an urban regeneration urban regeneration is at the core of it. And this is the moment that we have got to start to realign all our thinking, our attitudes, and our intentions. But what's got to be foregrounded is an attitudinal shift that informality has got to be destigmatized. It's got to become a recognized lifestyle in terms of a preference of a livelihood strategy, And that means that we've got to have an urban form that is responsive to that. Thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you very much, Richard and Rajan. And Dr. Laura Alfers, if you could just make some final comments, not just on all the contributions made, not by our panel, representing different parts of the informal economy, as well as the local government and COGTA representatives, and then the innovative approaches that has been shared by Richard and Rajan. Laura?
Thanks, Ashraf. And just to really a big thank you to all our presenters today. I think it's been an incredibly rich webinar, and we've had so many different perspectives from different parts of the government, from the universities, from civil society, and importantly, the informal worker organizations themselves. And I myself have learned a lot just sitting here today. So a big thank you as well to the NIOH for your work in helping us host this session. Perhaps just a final comment about, I guess, the idea of self-reliance, just reading some of the comments around that. I mean, I do think it is important that informal workers do have access to training and learning and are able to take a certain amount of responsibility for looking after themselves in their workplace. We do have to remember though, and this is partly why the OSHA is so inapplicable to informal workers who are self-employed, is that when you are very poor, when you're working in very poor conditions, and when your bottom line is getting bread onto the family table, you aren't necessarily going to prioritize your health. We know that. And so, self-reliance, particularly when you're asking individual workers to be self-reliant in looking after their own health under those extremely difficult conditions, is really why we are saying it can't be the full answer. We have to look beyond informal workers themselves. We have to look to informal worker organizations. We have to look to local government. We have to look to national government and the Department of Labor for the support they can give. We have to look to universities. We have to look to civil society. And importantly, we also need to be looking at the private sector and looking at industry. It's not true that informal workers are de-linked from what's happening to industry. If we look at waste pickers, for example, they are operating in waste value chains where bigger organizations than themselves are profiting from the work that they do in providing recyclables. So we also need to be asking the question about what support can we get from the private sector to support occupational health and safety in the informal economy. So that's just a final comment, and I think I'll leave it there. And thanks again to everybody who's contributed today.
Thank you. That's Dr. Laura Alfers, and I now have the task of just thanking everybody. We clearly have dealt quite a bit, not just from both international and national legal and regulatory framework as applicable, and with the gaps and shortcomings as applicable to the informal economy and those who are making their living in the informal economy, as well as those not just the self-reliance, but self-organization that's happening through the membership-based organizations that were represented, at least in this particular webinar, and the others that are organizing and self-organizing out there. The informal economy is an important component of the South African reality, and quite clearly COVID-19 has shown up some of the cracks and the gaps there. And we therefore thank our guest presenters and panelists, and I just need to quickly run through that. If I could just get these little boxes out of the way, one moment. There's the program. So thank you to Dr. Tanusha Singh, who's the head of our COVID-19 occupational health outbreak response team here at the NIOH, as well as the head of the immunology and microbiology section, for welcoming Dr. Laura Alfers from WIGO, and that is the Women in Informal Employment Globalizing and Organizing WIGO organization that has played a key role in setting this all together, and in particular Vanessa, I think, Pillay, as well as Pat Horn for making arrangements around this. Our panelists representing the specific areas of informal trading, the reclaimers, as well as public transport, Rashida Miller, Eva Mokwena, and Clement Donkabe. So thank you for your contributions. I should be going back, apologies. I think I should have paused. There we go. It's on some sort of timer. And then obviously our contributors on the local government responsibility, thank you very much to Suketo and Yvonne there, as well as to Richard and Rajan for their contributions around some of the very innovative things that have happened around this particular sector of the informal economy. And then finally, if I could just run over to those who've contributed as panelists, I'm going to just, apologies for that, I just need to quickly move on. There we go. So I've covered Richard. Thanks to Richard, project leader there at ASIE Tafeleni, was Yvonne Ofosu, and this is sort of a bit of an alphabetical order from COCTA, Deputy Director Urban Regeneration there in KwaZulu-Natal, as well as Ms. Bulelwa Huna, who's been part of our panelists answering questions. She's from the Department of Employment and Labour, a senior specialist there. Mr. Suketo Muvunza from Salga, thanks to you. Professor Rajan Naidu from the University of KwaZulu-Natal, Dr. Laura Alphas from WIGO, Pat Horn and Vanessa Pillay from WIGO. And then finally from, if I could just slightly go back there, the time had gone on, that's our colleagues here at the NIOH who has contributed, that is Dr. Tanusha Singh from the Outbreak Response Team, OHD, Ms. Jeanette Mangani, who's the co-lead for the COVID-19 OHD training program, Dr. Molan Mogombe, Ms. Anna Furi, and Mr. Moses Mokoni for their contributions as panelists. And not to forget that we've actually had also people supporting from the ILO. And I think the person is it Penny? There's been Penny and a number of other people, and it's going to take me a while just to get hold of their details, but I do have Penny Mankawa, who is from the ILO that WIGO is also asked to invite. And at that point, I need to say that you will find all the presentations as well as the recording of this particular webinar on the NIOH website. And as you've seen in some of our earlier slides, the NIOH website is zero rated by a number of the cell phone providers, and this is the website address. That's www.nih.ac.za. It is zero rated by Vodacom, MTN, Rain, MWeb, Telkom, Cellc, and Internet Solutions, which means when you get to the resources, the COVID-19 and the related resources, including these presentations and video recording, you will not be charged any data. And on that point, I need to then say thank you very much to everybody at the NIH, at WIGO, at the Department of Employment and Labour, at SALGA, at COCTA, at the University of KwaZulu-Natal, and ASIE Tafeleni, that's Richard there, and then the organizations Saita, Aro, and Klina Mashieli, that's Rashida, Eva, and Clement. Thank you for your contributions. Goodbye, and see you in our next webinar dealing with COVID-19, brought to you by the National Institute for Occupational Health.